Welcome to the Counteroffensive with Ryan Morrow, where tribalism goes to die. We talk about the extremist influences and the hostile foreign influence operations targeting both sides, and we're not concerned with tribalism here. Now, last week, if you tuned in, you saw that we had some really interesting, kind of exclusive information and analysis about the Russian influence operation targeting Candace Owens and George Farmer. Hence the name of the episode, The Farmer Factor. It turns out there's a whole trail that you need to follow in order to understand Russia's overall strategy, their influence operation, but specifically Farmer and Candace, that no one's really gone down. And we showed a pretty radical sermon that was delivered by George Farmer that had a lot of special word usage that, unless you're familiar with this operation, you wouldn't necessarily know what he's referring to, aside from some of the blatant stuff, like him saying the Antichrist is essentially technology and modern society and phones and things like that. Now, I said towards the end of that episode that I would continue the research because we saw multiple trails coming from there. And oh boy, did we find a lot. I mean, this is a big thing, guys. So I'm not ready to release everything because I've got piles of documents. So I'm going to work on putting that together, and hopefully in about the week after next is my intention to release it, and it'll blow your mind it's just such an amazing story, isn't it? I mean, we looked into Candace Owens in terms of the Russian influence operation, and as a central node, building from what's been going on with her outwards, you can really get a full picture of how extensive this stuff is and how much our civil dialogue, how our civil society operates, is being manipulated by our adversaries. I mean, mainstream debates that happen will be because of these things. Now, today, I want to bring you something kind of special, something that I'm not aware of anybody broadcasting just yet. And it is about New York City Mayor Mamdani and Alexander Soros, the son and successor to George Soros, the huge billionaire, one of the richest people in the world, who funds all sorts of organizations, some good and some not so good and some very bad. But he's considered a hero on the left wing of the political spectrum, but even that for a certain period of time, even part of the right wing, because Soros did fight communism, which is what's going to make the reveal today just so astonishing. So for those of you that just don't understand exactly how significant Soros is, because you might be thinking, all right, well, I'm always hearing about these billionaires funding things. How does he stand out? Well, according to the Media Research Center, citing a progressive fundraising organization, this is Open Society Foundation, Soros's foundation, maybe the single most influential nonprofit organization in the world. And that was according to a progressive website. The chief strategist for Morgan Stanley had this to say. He said that Soros has, quote, more influence in the world than anyone who has ever held high elective or appointive office. I'll say it again. More influence in the world than anyone who has ever held high elective or appointive office. That's more than a president. And finally, a New York Times reporter quoted the president of the Carnegie Endowment, just massive nonprofit, that says Soros is, quote, the only man in the United States who has his own foreign policy and can implement it. So, although there is a problem where everybody tries to connect everything to Soros, there are a lot of white supremacists that, because Soros is Jewish, they use him as like the Jewish octopus in Nazi propaganda to modernize it. And so, for a long time, I didn't want to go down this trail when I was working for other organizations, and everybody, there was so much interest because, number one, I figured if everybody's constantly talking about Soros, then like, what could I do? I'm sure everybody looked at where the money's going to and from because everybody's talking about the money. And then the other part of it was that at that time, Soros was playing such a big role in the, like I said, the anti-Semitic caricatures, that I had to weigh investing my time and possibly not finding anything versus knowing something that I know would happen, which is that if I did find something, it'd be immediately weaponized by the white supremacist types who I've been warning about. This woke right, the woke right, as it's called, thing I've been warning about for God knows how long, and it caused me a lot of trouble in my career, in my personal life. So I saw it all coming, and because I followed the chats and I saw how much Soros plays a role, not just in general conservative dialogue, and sometimes it gets exaggerated, but then in the white supremacist world, he was just a focal point. So I didn't really look at it until after October 7th, because I mapped out over 150 pro-terrorism groups that were fueling the protests, the often violent protests on college campuses and elsewhere. And the next question is, well, then who funds them? You map that out, you got to look at the funding. And so I said, all right, well, as I'm looking at funding in general, then I'll look at Soros as one of those components. And I was shocked by what I found. Absolutely shocked. And I put it together. It took many months to do what I'm about to explain. And then Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Just unbelievable. Just that was just I think about it, and it still just bothers me so much. But one of the last requests, according to Stephen Miller, that he had in a text message to Stephen Miller, was that he wanted, like, his next thing was to go after the radical groups that inspire violence, like the far left ones. Although I'm sure Charlie Kirk would have no problem with going after the far right ones that inspire violence too. But the far left was the main concern, obviously, and then ironically enough, he was a victim of that. And so I had this, and I just thought, I'm like, the best way I can honor Charlie is to release this now. I mean, I've got smoking guns about the Soros network. And so I went to Glenn Beck and said, I want to release this. And it turned out, I didn't know this, that 1 week following the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the guest host of the Charlie Kirk show was going to be Glenn Beck, because Glenn Beck inspired Charlie Kirk, who listened to his show every day for a while when he was growing up and getting into politics. And so actually, I'll show you what happened. I'll describe what I found. And for those of you guys who are wondering, like, all right, well, what about the dark profit? You're not going to understand the significance of it. Like, yeah, you'll know Soros is super rich and funds things, but you won't know the significance of it unless I show you the extent of what the Soros network has been doing that hasn't been really that much covered, and people didn't even know about the extent of until I released this report. And then marry that with what we're about to discuss tonight. So Alex, who, by the way, Alex Cuesta, the producer of the show, has his own podcast, the QuestaCast. Make sure you guys subscribe to that on YouTube and turn it into his podcast. But to close on who George Soros is, and therefore Alexander Soros, because he's taken over George Soros's network, let's play this clip from the Charlie Kirk show 1 week after he was assassinated, when Glenn Beck was guest hosting it, and I released the information from my investigation of Soros that were going on. I saw that was like manufactured. It was like pushing a button, and we identified over 150 pro-terrorism groups organizing those protests. There weren't peaceful groups behind it. And so when that report came out, which is very similar to this one, this is almost somewhat of a sequel. One of the radical entities that's Hamas friendly had this to say about the research that we released. So the same would be true of the Soros report that we're about to release at 1 o'clock. It said that these reports we're doing pose an existential threat that could easily mean a quick death for most of the groups by getting their tax-exempt statuses ripped away from them. And so those that survive would suffer mass chaos. So they're saying that we have figured out how to beat them if we just get this into the right hands. And so at 1 o'clock, this is what we're dropping about George Soros as part of our investigation. And that's what I said on your show earlier. The counteroffensive begins today. It begins at 1 o'clock.
It was probably 2010 that George Soros's number two guy met with my number two guy. And they had lunch in a public place because that's what we requested when they said we want to have lunch. And I was not part of it, but it was just the second in command, if you will, meeting with each other and sending messages. And this lunch started with, you need to tell your boss, me, is hurting my boss, Soros, and it's going to stop. And my guy said, I don't think it is. If he's getting something wrong, he'd be more than happy to correct it. And he said at the time, your boss needs to understand the ship has already sailed. It's just pulling out of port right now. And you're either on that ship or you're not. And you want to be on that ship. And he said, my boss is going to say he doesn't want to be on that ship. And at the very end of the conversation, he said, I want you to hear me clearly. This is going to stop. We took that as a very large threat. And that is one of the reasons why I did the Puppet Master show on Fox. I did a 3-day special showing everything about George Soros that we could find at the time. You realize who you're getting into war with, don't you?
I do, and I don't care. I know I'm supposed to do this. And so that ship that he was talking about, we're going to sink it. And all the other big billionaire funded organizations that are out there that are funding this type of filth, that are poisoning American civil society and spreading this type of hate that resulted in what happened a week ago, you're on notice. If you're doing this by mistake, I will volunteer my time to help you vet the organizations that you finance so you don't fund terrorism and hate if you're genuine.
Well, if you're
not genuine and you continue doing it, you're next.
Looking at your research, there's a handful of grants that are nuts for things like children that include ideas of hierarchy, supremacy, colonialism, and to the Alinsky Institute in France, which is in honor of Saul Alinsky, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's exactly right. When you go through the report, you'll see that the organizations that they're funding are so blatantly connected to foreign terrorist organizations, so blatantly extremist. This goes on year after year. So before, when there would be reports about this in drips and drabs, I could kind of understand some people saying, well, out of thousands of grants, maybe some mistakes are made. This is no mistake. We have disproven this. And I keep thinking about how when the Iranian regime allows pro-terrorism entities to fundraise on Iranian soil, what do we call that? We call that state sponsorship of terrorism. In the United States, when American nonprofits in the nonprofit sector allow pro-terror entities to fundraise on American soil, what do we call it? We call it charity. And so that has to come to an end. The IRS code, as we talk about in the report, is being violated. You're not allowed to engage in crime. You're not even allowed to encourage crime. That can't be part of your nonprofit mission. And so these statuses need to be revoked. And just like that one extremist group said, if we go down that path, we don't even have to get into the hate speech argument.
Yeah.
We can beat them. We can beat them rapidly.
Ryan, thank you so much. I really appreciate your conversation with us. Back on the Charlie Kirk Show in a minute.
And so, as you can imagine, that's probably going to be the most high-profile thing I've ever done because everyone was watching the Charlie Kirk Show after he passed during that week, and especially that day when Glenn Beck placed Rush Limbaugh's golden microphone onto Charlie Kirk's desk next to Charlie's microphone. It was, very, very powerful. It got a lot of attention. And so the eyes of the world were watching at that moment that we released it. And Glenn Beck did say on his show in the morning, when he also had me on and we were giving a preview of what we're going to release, that he would give it directly to President Trump. Later that night, Trump put out some tweets about going after people like Soros. I forget the exact quotes, but there were a few of them. It gave the impression to me he was talking to attorneys about the right way to say these things, so that he didn't jeopardize anything. And I thought, is it? Because I had sources telling me it was now at his desk, and I'm like, are those two things connected? And then amazingly, about only 3 business days later, this appears. Isn't that amazing? The New York Times reported that the Justice Department was formally preparing investigations in at least 5 states into George Soros's network. And I would assume the recipients of Soros's money, the many organizations that I identified that were pro-October 7th, pro-Hamas, about 25 million went to groups that engage in what fits the definition of domestic terrorism, and really like violate the IRS code, in my opinion. And I think nobody could reasonably argue with that. And so that was just astonishing. That was a direct result of doing this type of research. And you can see why I want to continue doing it, especially through this podcast. And, if I had the resources, I would turn everything into a written product as well from the podcast, because what we do here on this podcast works. I mean, triggering an investigation of Soros and doing this type of research, because it blew my mind that all this time, nobody had systematically gone through all of the organizations that Soros gave money to based on his own records. No one had done that. And I didn't do it because I assumed somebody had. and so the stuff that you're hearing on the podcast, when it's delivered in the right way, when it's messaged in the right way, can have very big effects. I mean, since the beginning of when I first started becoming politically aware, people were saying, "Oh, how do we take on Soros? What do we do about this?" And most people said, "Oh, well, he's too powerful. Look at what happened. Look at what we did." Now, his organization, led by his son, Alexander Soros, did respond to the firestorm we caused. So let's show that response and blow it up so that people can read it. It's pretty funny. So, the Open Society Foundations unequivocally condemn terrorism and do not fund terrorism. Our activities are peaceful and lawful. Our grantees are expected to abide by human rights principles and comply with the law. These accusations are politically motivated attacks on civil society meant to silence speech the administration disagrees with and undermine the First Amendment right to free speech. When power is abused to take away the rights of some people, it puts the rights of all people at risk. Blah, 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 blah. So they and then their allies start attacking the Trump administration and myself, and the organization that published the report with me, Capital Research Center, where I'm still a senior fellow, a senior counter-extremism fellow, and saying this was politically motivated. You guys know by now I would never do something out of political motivations. If you're doing bad stuff, I want to call it out and investigate it. I don't care, and I'm a registered independent, so I'm not even a registered Republican. And I don't identify as conservative, liberal, or anything else because my focus is narrow. So the idea of political motivations, that doesn't make sense. But notice what they said there. They said, all right, we condemn terrorism and we expect we abide by the law and we expect all of our grantees to abide by the law. This is an attack on free speech. I got news for you. The Constitution does not give you a right to have the privileges of a nonprofit organization. That's why the IRS code regulating nonprofits exists. You are not born with the right to a nonprofit. There are standards. So, but they tried to flip it into saying like, oh, well, we stand for free speech. Me too. I also stand for keeping up with the law, abiding by the law. And I showed in the report where we found, I forgot to say the amount. I found 80 million. So I should have said that earlier. 80 million I found going from Soros's network to pro-terrorism groups, including ones engaged in the domestic terrorism, like property destruction and things like that on U.S. soil. Now, here is the New York Times coverage when the initial story came out, and I want to point out something. It says the report did not accuse Open Society of bankrolling or ordering specific violent acts. That is true. That's not how it works. It's grant money going to different nonprofits, and then they act independently from there, at least based on what we can see in public. Rather, it pointed to statements made by organizations Soros helped fund, some of which applauded terrorist attacks like the October 7th attacks, or encouraged U.S. activists to block roads or destroy property during protests. Now, considering the bias I expected, I was pretty happy with that summary. I mean, that's a pretty fair characterization. A lot of the report is going to pro-terrorism groups. The majority is going to pro-terrorism and terror-tied groups. And that would include supporting the October 7th attacks. And then a portion went to those engaging in domestic terrorism, which if you go by the FBI's definition of what that is, that does include politically motivated destruction of property, breaking the law, intimidation, things like that. And so the New York Times actually backed us up on that. The only thing they got me on, and it's so minor, and this just shows how they must have had a lot of people pouring through, because my report was massive, tons of endnotes. And they just found one wrong hyperlink, basically. One slightly incorrect hyperlink, and then an explanation of that hyperlink, where with one group had a pro-Hamas picture in a pamphlet that they made, a guide that they made, and there's certain images that appear over and over again from October 7th. And I looked at that image, and I thought it was from there. And it showed, I actually thought it was the paraglider because it was really small. So I thought it was one of Hamas's paragliders going over the wall, because the picture just looked so much like the rest of them. But it was actually a Palestinian with the Palestinian flag illegally climbing over the security wall during a time of contention. And it's like a famous in the terrorist world, a semi-famous image is an image that you'll see around, pushed by Hamas supporters. And so the New York Times said, oh, we did find one error. You said this from October 7th. Actually, it was just a different, very similar pro-terrorism image associated with promoting Hamas, just from a different year. Like, okay, New York Times, you found that one obscure link out of everything in that huge report. And that's the one little minor thing I would change if I had to go back. So I was pretty proud of that. Now,
Ryan,
yes,
I just want to pop in. We have a super chat, and I think you're going to answer this question throughout the show. But Texas Motherbird 63 for $10, $9.99. Thank you for the super chat. Asks, Ryan, why after all these years of hearing about Soros has nothing been done here in the U.S. about his actions? And like I said, I feel like this is something you're going to answer throughout the show, but thank you for the $9.99 in the question.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the super chat. Guys, super chats help us continue this show. I'm 100% dependent on your guys' support. The $1 challenge, I challenge you every time you watch one of the podcasts to donate at least $1. It actually could be less than $1. Because my nonprofit, the Morrow Institute, is is registered nonprofit, so you get a tax deduction if you file your taxes, and you get those the charitable deduction. So I just ask for at least $1 that you donate if you actually care about this, not just interested in the topic, not just entertained by discussion of it, but you actually care. Please donate at least $1. Tax deductible to the Morrow Institute. You can find that at ryanmorrow.com. The website's under construction, but at the top and the right hand side, you can see the donate button, or you can do a super chat or a gift or whatever here on the social media platforms. Now, as for your question about what took so long, I mean, part of it is that Soros, like I said, these were quotes from not activists. Like the quotes about how powerful he is were coming from prominent people. So you got to ask yourself, what politician would ever want to take that on? Especially when at least at the time, it was hard to say. Before my report came out, it was hard to show that they were violating the IRS code or violating a law. That's what was so important about what I did, and now I released it in honor of Charlie Kirk, because it showed so much money going to not just pro-terrorism groups, but domestic terrorist groups within the United States, groups that engage in that illegal activity. And most people didn't know. This is so key. And this was left out of the New York Times report. the IRS code for decades has said a nonprofit can't be involved in organizing or assisting criminal acts. Even a local ordinance can't be violated. Your status should be stripped. That's in the IRS code. So in my experience, the vast majority of people did not know that. And so my argument was not that they should be locked up, Soros. And I said that I felt that the evidence should lead to an investigation. So it's the burden to find a smoking gun is not on me. I found the information necessary for an investigation that would enable the process to find those smoking guns, because someone like Soros knows not to have smoking guns out in the open. But is there enough smoke to justify looking for a fire? Absolutely. So why hasn't Soros been taken on until after Charlie's death? Intimidation, all of that is super powerful, but the evidence wasn't gathered and presented in the way that was necessary for something to happen. And you also needed to have a friendly administration in power. You had to have a political environment that would welcome that. And you needed to be able to show something beyond just, oh, we don't like your speech, obviously, right? Because I would never want to prosecute or investigate Soros or anybody just off of legal free speech. And that's why the entire report is not about that, despite what Open Society said. Now, I want to emphasize, because this is going to drive you guys nuts. The New York Times initial report, that screenshot, can we just bring that back up, Alex? Okay, so the report did not accuse Open Society of bankrolling or ordering specific violent acts. All right, but here's what the New York Times concedes is correct. It pointed to, not alleged statements. This is stated as fact from the report. It pointed to statements made by organizations it helped fund, some of which applauded terrorist attacks like Hamas's October 7, 2023 attack on Israel, or encouraged U.S. activists to block roads or destroy property during protests. So that's the New York Times confirming that that's the content of the report and that we accurately showed it. It didn't say purported. It didn't say we allege. It said, no, they showed it. Okay, now, some days later, the New York Times covers this again because of one of the top political issues. Let's see how they characterized it. Okay, so we do not offer proof. The groups that received money use that exact money to commit acts of violence or terrorism, which is an insane standard. That's impossible. Nobody can, that's not how it works. A grant for, say, 100,000 goes to a group, and then that group can do what it wants or do what the Soros Foundation expects. But it's not like that standard would require me or anyone to find Soros saying, here's $20 to go burn a building down. And then the person taking it and saying, okay, I agree to go burn a building down, and then going and burning a building down. That's an insane, characterization, but it's meant to cast doubt on the report and says, instead, it focused largely on what the Soros Network's grantees said. Yes, not what they did. They use the word largely, so I guess I'm okay with that. Most people, when they see that, they think you just interpret it as, oh, all right, well, it's false because of the way it's characterized. But here's the kicker, guys. All right, so remember the first one. It said, all right, so the groups that Soros was funding, according to my report, supported the October 7th attacks and acts of destruction. New York Times suddenly changed their description. Soros grantees offered support for Palestinians in the wake of violent attacks against Israel, not calling them terrorist attacks, not mentioning Hamas. And not mentioning, that was support for the October 7th attacks. So what the New York Times originally reported accurately was Soros funding groups that celebrate the October 7th attacks. Now, New York Times characterizes as Palestinian support for Palestinians in the wake of violent attacks against Israel. Okay, and then the first one said that the groups funded by Soros in the report were engaging in crime. Some of them. I mean, property destruction, blocking roads, those are violent, the violation of local ordinances, law. New York Times decides to contradict itself, and look how they characterize it now. suggested tactics for civil disobedience and urged people to turn out for a protest aimed at blocking an Israeli ship from arriving at a port in Oakland, California. That's just one example, and they know that. And they took one. They're trying to make it sound like this is just entirely like a pro-Israel thing. But suggested tactics for civil disobedience. So what happened here? October 7th, support for the October 7th attacks became offering support for Palestinians in the wake of violent attacks against Israel. Soros funding groups that block roads and destroy property became suggested tactics for civil disobedience and urged people to turn out for a protest aimed at blocking an Israeli ship. Like, you can cite the New York Times against the New York Times in the matter of just a few days. I thought that was amazing. So that I put there, I wanted to go through this with Soros so that you guys can see the significance of what we're about to show, because there's potentially legal consequences very indirectly. But it could help, I guess, show be evidence of intent. And I want the audience to understand that we're not just talking about your typical billionaire or even just the richest guy in political donor world, but we found 80 million going to these extremist groups. Yes.
I want to jump in before you get rolling on the meat and potatoes of the show. We had another super chat. Twinkly coming in for a big $20, saying, with all the propaganda and bad faith journalism, what are some reliable sources regarding the Israel-Gaza issue and the Russia-Ukraine war? Well, first, I'd like to point to Ryan Morrow.
I was just about to, I was going to just go, me.
Just go to Ryan Morrow. Go read what Ryan writes about it, and because he gives you a lot more than just surface area XYZ was bombed. He tells you why. But Ryan, I'll let you answer as
I would say we make the mistake when we look for sources that we trust, because even ones that you trust screw up. I mean, I cited a very, very, very minor mistake that I made in the Soros report that's completely inconsequential, but it still happens. So I would say instead of looking for reliable sources that you invest your confidence in, especially because staff changes and there's different staff at one outlet. So it could be, so what do? The one that you trust the next day you might be reading an article from them that's written by someone else who you can't trust and you wouldn't even know. So what do? I say be comprehensive. If you're using Google News, that's a good way to do it. Read multiple articles about the same thing. Most people won't do this, but I find it very healthy to do. Make yourself look at both right-wing and left-wing discussions of the topic. Actually seek it out. Take that step outside of your ecosystem and use AI. In fact, use AI to say, what's the other side to this issue? Is this true? Are there any gaps? So I would say that the answer is to look for a reliable process for evaluating information from sources rather than looking for reliable sources. Develop a reliable process rather than relying on reliable sources is how I would describe it. As for someone said foreign news, well, on X, that's automatically translated now, but you can use Google News for that as well. Now, think about this. So I'm going to do the reveal in 1 second, but public figures like Mamdani, like Soros, they always, just like your average person, all of us do, you do modify things you say and how you behave based on your audience. And so if you have a big audience, you're a Soros or Mamdani, there's going to be a lot of modification, a lot of thought into how you say things. And very few people authentically represent themselves, who they are, behind the scenes, behind closed doors, and do it in public. And that's why Trump resonated, because you saw the same character on reality TV that you see in his personal life that was well known from paparazzi, and people like that. Whether they liked what he said and did is a different, that's where the division is. But the majority of people like the authenticity, whether they voted for him or not. So when you look at information, you find something disturbing about a public figure, ask yourself if there's a pattern. And are they possibly more radical than they're letting on? And the way you can tell that is, who are they hanging out with? What narratives are they kind of winking at but not spelling out? Who are they reading? Who are they a student of? That'll give you an idea how they invest their time on whether they're more radical. Now, keep that in mind. So, is Mamdani and Alexander Soros more radical than they give out? Much more radical? Well, I think we found out the answer because Alexander Soros just met with this guy, Zizek, Zizek, from Slovenia. Most people probably haven't heard of him, but he has been called the most dangerous philosopher in the West. Vice called him a superstar communist, rabidly anti-American. If you look at his 2008 book, In Defense of Lost Causes, according to the description on that book, so it's effectively his own words, he, quote, argues the case for revolutionary terror and the dictatorship of the proletariat. Argues the case for revolutionary terror and the dictatorship of the proletariat. And Alexander Soros is meeting with him. Actually, let's go to Alex. The one that is Alexander Soros' tweet. Let's go to that with Slavoj Zizek. So here is the tweet that then has several pictures in it from Alexander Soros that came out. This is the smoking gun. He describes Slavoj Zizek as one of the greatest living philosophers, disruptors, and cultural critics. One of a kind in many ways, having wrestled with his works and provocation since I was a young student. I am grateful to our mutual friend for introducing us and giving us the chance to exchange and debate our views. Zizek may hate sports with a passion, but wore the Knicks hat proudly when I told him that Mayor Mamdani was a fan.
So I just want to pop in too, and if anyone is wondering where they've heard this gentleman's name before, if you're a Jordan Peterson fan, him and Zizek had a famous debate a few years ago when Jordan Peterson was really skyrocketing on the rise as a leading intellectual and kind of like the new blend of right movement. And one of the things about Zizek is he tells you he hates capitalism with a smile, and then people shake his hand after he tells you exactly what he wants. And so just want to keep in mind that while in these pictures, he presents himself kind of looking like the boogeyman here, this guy has been accepted by Western debaters in terms of his ideas having any sort of legitimacy, because in liberalism, we debate everyone. So just want to, if anyone thinks that they know who he is, if you're a Jordan Peterson person from back in the day, this is a famous debate Jordan had.
Thank you for that, Alex. So Zizek is radical all the time. So this isn't a situation where you can say, oh, I was a fan of his work, but I didn't know about this part, or I disagreed with this part and then agreed with this part. Like, no, this is it, guys. It's the stuff I'm about to tell you. And this is who Alexander Soros is saying, one of the greatest philosophers of our time, who he's followed and like absorbed his work since he was a student, to the point where he likes him enough where he goes to, when he's in Slovenia, he meets with him in person and then tells him that Mayor Mamdani is a fan. Why is the mayor of New York City a fan of this guy? So keep in mind these descriptions, okay? So it's not, because they're going to say it's guilt by association. It's not about that. You are saying that Soros is saying that he was largely developed and inspired by this guy. Probably would say, oh, I don't agree with everything, but everyone can say that about every person. But his content is 100% radical. So if you're inspired at all, if you're absorbed in it at all, and you come away thinking positively, you are a radical. And why would Mayor Mamdani be a fan of his? A fan of this guy? Okay, so keep those two expressions of support for him from these two guys in mind as I tell you some more about this. So that book, In Defense of Lost Causes, well, what are the lost causes? They name them in the description. the Bolsheviks, Mao Zedong, Robespierre, even the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979 and fascism, because Zizek has called himself left fascist, were right steps in the wrong direction. So many communists will say this, oh, well, we made some mistakes, obviously, because the Soviet Union collapsed. Some will even go so far as to say there were mistakes from the beginning. Our society hasn't evolved yet to handle and implement communism the right way. So that's like the main Marxist thing is communism didn't fail. It just wasn't tried the right way. Going on, the book talks about Hitler. But this guy's not a Nazi, but here's what he says. Crazy, tasteless even as it may sound. The problem with Hitler was that he was not violent enough. Nazism was not radical enough. It did not dare to disturb the basic structure of the modern capitalist social space. You think that's radical? Are you disturbed that the mayor of New York City is a fan of this guy? How do you feel knowing that somebody with billions and billions of dollars is such a fan of him that he's taking a picture like that with him and talks about how much he inspired him and informed his views? In another book, Zizek wrote, better the worst Stalinist terror than the most liberal capitalist democracy. So even the worst of Stalin is better than the best liberal capitalist democracy is what he's saying. Now, how does he want all this to happen? It's not just, is he nonviolent, just want the ideas to be carried out by politicians who will never be elected, so we shouldn't care? Because, if it's a fringe idea and it's not going to be implemented, who cares? Guys, this is stuff on par with bin Laden and Anwar al-Awlaki. You might disagree on who you can target with what I'm about to say, but that's tactics. Here's what this, as he's been described, superstar communist teaches. He describes and urges divine violence. And he writes, the most obvious candidate for divine violence is the violent explosion of resentment, which finds expression in a spectrum that ranges from mob lynchings to revolutionary terror. Now, we already know what he means by revolutionary terror because he specified it. When he's talking about the Iranian Islamic Revolution, Robespierre, Mao, the Bolsheviks, Stalin. He even has a poster or a picture of Stalin in his apartment or house. When a reporter went to interview him, it was right there. You walk in, what do you see? You see Stalin. That is... I actually would never have thought that even if Alexander Soros still funded the groups that his dad did, I never would have thought that he was this radical. It's unbelievable. Mamdani, maybe because of his wife's support for express support for October 7th and terrorism and everything else that's that he has said and done. But I was surprised by this. And here's the thing, guys. He says he wants to go further than his dad. He says he wants to go more political. His dad wasn't political enough. What that means, less humanitarian and more political. That framing is gonna be very important for the next couple parts. But before I get to that, because I want to connect this podcast to everything else, let's ask the question: if Zizek is such a superstar and he's promoting this, who would be crazy enough to team up with him? Where would he get a platform? Who would take that risk? Oh, what do you know? What do you know, guys? He writes for RT, the official Russian propaganda station. And what's one of the things that he's done there? If you want to go to the next one, Alex, let's look at who he hangs out with and collaborates with at RT. Julian Assange. WikiLeaks is a whole nother thing. I'll eventually one day get to that. but obviously very Russia connected in influence operations aimed at Americans. And here he is, the second episode when Julian Assange had a show on RT, which I don't know how people forgot that. But when people say WikiLeaks and Julian Assange isn't connected to Russia, he had a friggin' show on RT. And I think the first episode was with Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah. I'm pretty sure that was the first episode. But the second was with Zizek. How wild is that? How is Julian Assange these days? Last I heard was he was still ill, and I forget what his status is. I'd rather than say something I might be wrong, I'll just say I'll look it up. The last I heard was them saying that he was sick and all of that, but I forget the exact status. So Julian Assange had a show on RT, yet people somehow still have this heroic figure of him. I think because of political tribalism. Because I saw the cover change. Oh, the right hated Julian Assange at one point. And then all of a sudden, he became an asset against the Democrats. And all of a sudden, now he's a courageous freedom fighter for free speech. So he has a show on RT. And the second episode is with Zizek. And then there's another, you see Democracy Now! So they even appear on shows together. So the association goes beyond that. So they have a commonality in the RT connection there. So that's important. Now let me see, which direction do I want to go in? Before I get to the next connection, well, let's review the Soros thing. So what's really interesting here and ironic, and it gives you an idea into how this might happen when George Soros fought the Soviet Union and communism. I mean, yeah, he's funded bad things, but he does fund human rights groups that have stood up to the Assad regime in Syria, the Iranian regime, Russia today. He'll also fund groups that are pro-Russia as an aside, as part of their overall worldview. I'm not aware of George Soros funding explicitly pro-Russian entities with a pro-Russian agenda, but he certainly has funded groups that are like pro-Hamas, and you find out they're pro-Russia on the side. So this is a big thing. Alexander Soros is embracing and influenced by someone who's a different type of radical than his father, much worse, but also very much opposed in a very deep way. Ironically, and keep in mind, Alexander Soros said he was a student of Zizek. Zizek has harshly ridiculed Soros as a liberal communist, where Soros, for all his faults, he's not a communist, but Zizek says he describes him as one of liberal communists. We can go to the screenshot so you guys can read it along with me, because this is amazing that Alexander Soros would embrace a guy who wrote this about his dad. He says that, in fact, these liberal communists, and that you guys can see right there where he mentions Soros, right after Bill Gates, the usual suspects, Bill Gates and George Soros. So those are liberal communists. And he says they may be allies against racism, sexism, and religious obscurantism. So, you can ally with them, but you need to understand, quote, the enemy of every true progressive struggle today is Soros and the other, as he calls them, liberal communists, which is bizarre, a bizarre terminology. He goes on to say, to describe what the problem is with liberal communists. Zizek says that they promote a new postmodernized version of Adam Smith's invisible hand. The market and social responsibility are not opposites, but can be reunited for mutual benefit. In other words, embracing capitalism, believing that you can have a socially responsible society and make improvements socially at the same time that you're capitalist and you have a free market. And so that's the big sin of Soros. He's too capitalist for Zizek. So this is a I mean, this guy is not just more radical than George Soros. He's massively more radical. We can go to the next screenshot. Because he says, so he's essentially comparing Soros to diarrhea. Alexander Soros is taking pictures with a guy that compared his dad to diarrhea. And and because he's talking about, well, you guys can read it. But the key part here, aside from that attention-grabbing comparison, this is how he describes Soros, because he's an evil capitalist. He says Soros's daily routine is a lie embodied. Half of his working time is devoted to financial speculation, the other half to humanitarian activities, financing cultural and democratic activities in post-communist countries, writing essays and books, which work against the effects of his own speculations. Okay, guys, so that means he's profiting off of capitalism with his investments and being like a financial mastermind, knowing how to invest and make profit. And that's evil to Zizek. And so he says Soros causes the problems through his capitalism that he profits off of, and then presents himself as a humanitarian to solve them. And so the implication there is that Zizek is saying Soros is evil because he's a capitalist, but he also should be spending his money on political stuff rather than humanitarian. Keep that in mind. So he goes on to say the two faces of Bill Gates are exactly like the two faces of Soros. On the one hand, a cruel businessman destroying or buying out competitors, aiming at a virtual monopoly. On the other, the great philanthropist. He's talking sarcastically. So the criticism is that he's a capitalist, therefore he's evil, he's not revolutionary, and that the way he spends his money on it should go towards political change, destroying capitalism rather than humanitarian stuff. Here's the kicker, guys. When Alexander Soros was asked if he would change anything once he fully takes the helm, once George Soros passes away and Alexander fully takes the helm, what is he going to do with the Open Society Foundations and the Soros Network and all of its billions? He said he's going to go in a more political, that's his word, more political direction. More political as opposed to what? Humanitarian. Now, what was Zizek's criticism of his dad, George Soros? That he wasn't revolutionary enough and that he invested too much in humanitarian stuff rather than political stuff. And then here you have Alexander Soros saying, and nobody realizing the connection here in the thought process and where he got this idea from, like, no, we need to move in a more political direction and reduce. So therefore, even though he didn't say it, it's implied he would have to reduce funding for non-political stuff, right? If you're going to invest more political stuff, you have to invest less in non-political stuff. That's a watered-down, sanitized version of Zizek's criticism of his dad. So I guess Alexander Soros had daddy problems. I mean, who knows what went on, but I mean, he was attracted to this guy who was more radical than his dad and criticized his dad horrible ways. And I'm sure there's a personal element there that we aren't aware of. Now, there's another person that's worth pointing out. So who are we talking about? So we learned that Alexander Soros and Mamdani are fans of Zizek. Alexander Soros is in a picture with Zizek. But there's also a group photo with another face. Can anyone spot this person? I'm looking in the chat. Okay, no, it looks like no. Wait. Oops. Okay, so no, not yet. So I will show you guys. One person, yep. Forgot her name though. So that's a partial victory for you. If you look at the woman with black hair who's sitting down in the front, the middle one. Oh, Mamdani's okay. Wait, Mamdani's wife is there? I actually did not notice that. If that's accurate, all right. Twinkly, got it. Huma Abedin. Who is that? The right-hand person, or was the right-hand person to Hillary Clinton for forever, basically. The person closest to Hillary Clinton. She's also was one of them, if you remember, in like 2011, 2012, maybe. There was a controversy because some members of Congress said there needs to be an investigation into Muslim Brotherhood connected people exerting influence in the Obama administration, U.S. government as a whole. And Huma Abedin's family has connections to some Islamist radical groups, not necessarily terrorists, but connected to Muslim Brotherhood type networks overseas because she's a Muslim. And so the family had these connections, and people were saying, well, Huma Abedin, we don't know anything really about her and her views. She seems moderate. I mean, there's no hijab or anything. But is there a security clearance issue here? I mean, should she be the right-hand person to Hillary Clinton with a security clearance and access to all that when you have a family that is connected to Muslim Brotherhood and extremist Islamic things overseas? So that's when she became famous. And some people did go too far with it because, like, you don't want to say, oh, because of your family, you're a radical. But I think the point about security clearance was legitimate. But it's just amazing that Huma Abedin. Oh, and the reason she's there is because she's married to Alexander Soros. I'm sorry, I forgot that. So Alexander Soros is married to Huma Abedin, the former right-hand person to Hillary Clinton. I mean, right-hand for like the longest time. Like couldn't be. I think Hillary actually called her almost an adoptive daughter, like an adopted daughter. She marries Alexander Soros, which at this point, I mean, that would indicate that she's much more radical than we knew. And so that's very concerning. Those of you that point out Mamdani's wife there, assuming that's accurate, thanks for pointing that out. I don't know what she looks like. I've obviously seen pictures of her, but I don't remember. Alex, maybe you can pull up a picture of Mamdani's wife. Let's see if she's there. Because that would bring this even closer. It would be not just that Mamdani is a fan of Zizek, but his wife went to the meeting with Alexander Soros and Zizek. That would be amazing. Yep. Nikki says it all ties together. Yep. Okay, so that is Mamdani's wife. Let's look at the group photo and see if.
I'd say that's a negative there.
It's a negative. Okay. All right, guys. So that's why it's important to fact check. Yeah. So, but nonetheless, the point that we're making, you still have Alexander Soros, who's close enough with Mamdani to convey his support to Zizek, and Soros saying how Zizek played such a formative role, and you wouldn't detect it because Alexander Soros isn't out there all the time saying political stuff. But just in that statement where he said if he believes the Soros network should go in a more political direction, that's an implied criticism, a very respectful one, of his father, because he says it should be more political, and that intellectually is likely a product of Zizek's influence, because that's just, they're so close ideologically if Soros is following his work. Now, an interesting fact about Zizek. Who do you think he supported in 2016, guys? It was actually Trump. So that's the other ironic thing about Huma Abedin there. So Zizek supported Trump in 2016 because he felt that would stimulate more socialist, communist type forces in the United States, that there'd be essentially a backlash, and that it would represent those outside the system taking over the system. And that was more important than having Hillary Clinton in there, who Zizek did not like. And just like he didn't like Soros because he sees the mainstream Democratic Party as being, capitalist and too moderate. And honestly, from my research into Hillary Clinton's views, and I've done a lot, she would not like Zizek. definitely not. So that's just so interesting that you then have Hillary Clinton's right-hand person at a meeting with Zizek. And Zizek supported Trump in 2016. And then he said he favored Biden just by a little bit in 2020. So that gives you, but that's important to think about, because for a lot of these seditionist forces, since they want to overthrow the system, they're not like Republican or Democrat, some like conservative or liberal. They're outside it. And so in that case, they felt, all right, so there might be more policies that, the left may be a little bit more aligned with this communist revolutionary terror vision. But the most important thing is revolution, bringing down the system, removing the powers that be and at the top, the elites. And so Trump represented that to Zizek, and he actually supported them. And so the ideology of who they support is it's Americans are used to choosing R or D, left or right. And we assume that our adversaries then do the same thing. It's a lot more abstract for them. And Zizek represents that. It's revolution. Who it represents the system being overthrown, who's going to cause instability. He judged, all right, well, Trump's outside the system, so we're going to go with Trump. So hold on one second. That's it. So there's also, I want to tie this again, and then we'll finish up, and I'll take any questions if you guys have them, especially if they're a super chat. I know this one's a little bit shorter, but I feel like this is breaking news in a sense. No mainstream outlet has covered this, and this is a big friggin' deal. Something else that connects this podcast to the other episodes we've done. Zizek is essentially saying what many Marxists say. They say, communism wasn't really tried, or it was tried and it failed because of mistakes. We can make it better. Zizek will sometimes say he's not a communist necessarily. He'll say he is, but then he'll sometimes say left fascist. Basically, what he's talking about is upgrading communism. So you can find that he criticized the Soviet Union. Zizek, even though he has those Russia ties, supports Ukraine against Russia. There's actually communists I know of, and anarchists that you think would be on the Russian side. They're actually on the Ukrainian side for reasons I won't get into. So that's not as uncommon as you might think for that split to exist. But Zizek is saying, when he talks about the name of the book, the name of his book is, so it's about something with lost causes, right? And he says the lost causes we need to bring back were Mao Zedong, Robespierre from the French Revolution, the Bolsheviks. But he'll also harshly criticize them, just like he criticized the Soviet Union. I saw some quotes where he criticized Stalin. He criticizes Russia now. He's talking about upgrading communism and putting his little spin on it so it can be reintroduced. So you guys see this? You see what I'm saying? So it's communism not just repackaged, but almost like an addendum. We're not going to do it the right way, but we're going to make it even a little bit better, and we'll be able to reintroduce it essentially to the whole globe. Now, where else did we see this in the podcast? Right? The upgrading of the ideologies. It's what the Soviets and Russia did. In 1987, I believe it was, the Soviets put together a team. They said, look, communism's failing. Very apparent. So what do we need to do? We need to have a, quote, new Soviet ideology, as it was described, and we need to revitalize communism. Fix it. They know communism as an objective is right and all that, but as an ideology and implementing it, we just need to fix it. And then what they concluded from that task force was that they needed to reinvent communism to include communism, at least the parts that they want to transfer over, because Putin has criticized Marxism for some, relatively minor things. But the conclusion of the Soviets was we need to combine communism with nationalism and Orthodox Christianity, the Russian Orthodox Church, and nationalism. Yep, nationalism, Russian Orthodox Church. I forget the other one I said. So it was nationalism, or orthodoxy. All right, whatever. So I can't believe I'm forgetting it. So they decided, okay, we need to upgrade communism, and that's how they reacted to the fall of it. And now what you're seeing when I talk about Tsarist Christianity, a Tsar, T-S-A-R, Tsarist Christianity, an authoritarian Christianity that has clear Marxist influence, even if it disavows Marx. What are we talking about? We're talking about an upgrade. Putin upgraded communism in his mind. So yeah, he criticizes Marxism, but why does he still hang out with Stalinists and go to communist events? Because he still is one of them, but he's criticizing it from the perspective of, I took something that was good and made it better, which is very different than disavowing it. I suspect very shortly, you're going to see this coming out of Iran, especially if it's true that there's a power struggle there. So you have Zizek and people like him upgrading communism and saying revive the lost causes, but fix their errors, and he has a lot of criticisms. You have the Soviets then upgrading communism to create this like Tsarist Christianity embodied by Putin. So what's going to happen with the Iranian Islamic Revolution based on the pattern? The current leadership is, wiped out. It's probably true. There's a somewhat of a power struggle between those that are more pragmatic and don't just want war all the time, a little bit more strategic. And then there's the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps that oppose negotiations at all, just want war all the time. That appears to be, a conflict. And so what would this pattern indicate for Iran? That you're going to see a group of people who support the Iranian Islamic Revolution, unlike the Iranian people. So they're not the best people. People from the regime that say, I'm going to fix it. Just like Zizek. Zizek is fixing communism. The Soviets and Russia fixed communism. You're going to have Iranian regime officials that say, we are going to fix the Iranian Islamic Revolution. And so the U.S. should accept us, alleviate pressure. And I actually predicted in an article in January, I said, this is very likely to happen as the U.S. campaign against Iran goes on over time. And what you'll see is the officials maybe even going so far as to close some of the prisons where they torture prisoners. You may have potentially some trade agreements with the outside world. The idea is going to be to save the Iranian Islamic Revolution, save the regime, improve it, and in so doing, obviously deceive the West, because the West will be so desperate for a resolution and for things to get better that we will essentially betray the Iranian people who say they don't want the Iranian Islamic Revolution at all. But then you have these other characters from the regime that come by and they say to America and the world, let us continue to call ourselves part of that ideology and teach it, but we're going to pursue it differently. And then this military conflict can stop. The economy can improve. Your political fortunes, your approval rating can improve. That's going to be a tempting deal for every leader in the West to say, all right, well, let's just take that. But understand what that would be, what that is. It's the same thing as what Putin did by reviving communism. It's the same thing Zizek is trying to do with communism, or as he calls it, fascist left. So if you guys are looking for an article about this, it just went up at glennbeck.com, where it talks about Mamdani and Alexander Soros' Dark Profit. It's an article that I authored. So if you want this in written form, you kind of have that there in article format with all the hyperlinks and everything else. But I hope that this reveal shocked you guys. I mean, it shocked me when I saw the photo. And make sure you like, subscribe. Please donate to the Morrow Institute so this can continue at ryanmorrow.com. There's the article at glennbeck.com. So make sure you share that, read it. That'll have all the facts. And like I said, we're going to continue the other trail that I've been following in relation to Candace Owens and George Farmer, and how this connects to the Russian influence operation through Catholicism, how they're targeting Catholicism specifically in order to advance the anti-Western agenda. And then this is what we talk about today, is another trail that this is happening through. And that's why I say it's the global seditionist movement. I don't say far left and far right, or if I do, I usually qualify. I try not to, because it's that's an obsolete framing. It's the global seditionist movement, and it crosses and eliminates that binary of far left, far right, or anything else. The threat is singular, and I think this demonstrates it. So, Alex, are there any questions or anything for me that I should respond to? I saw Mackenzie. Thank you for what you're saying in the chat about donating. Really appreciate that. It looks like Alex might have fallen off. Okay, guys. So, there he's coming back.
I'm back.
Hey, so were there any questions, super chats, or anything that I need to address?
So we took care of all the super chats, but I have decided to be better this week. And since we have enough time, I went back and I made sure that I starred all the questions that we had directed at you. So let's go over some here.
Let's do it.
So we'll take two from more recently because you were just talking about it. Twinkly wants to know what countries along with Russia and Iran are also involved with this.
Great question. Great question. So it's more than you would think. I have a map that I've been working on that divides the world. There'll be some in the middle, but if you had to divide into two categories, the allies or the global seditionist movement, or specifically the foreign component of the global seditionist movement, I call the axis of sedition, to represent the foreign governments. So that as one wing. So I would say the axis, I believe there are about a dozen countries or 10 on there, and then everybody else was more with the allies. But that's a map that I'm looking to release on a future podcast. Maybe I'll even do it next week. But the ones that are on the side of the axis, let's see which ones. Nicaragua, Cuba, Brazil, although there's a lot of people that think that the next elections are going to take care of that. Most of the Marxists, the ones I can think of in Latin America, have been voted out. There's been a wave, an anti-Marxist wave, that took them out of even Bolivia and these other places.
Would you consider the Belt and Road Initiative countries a part of that axis by default because they've made these deals with China that kind of economically tie them?
I would not. Because they'll also have ties with us. So then you have to factor that in. And most countries, I mean, you need to do business with China. Like you just have to. So for some countries, it's going to make sense to have, the Belt and Road Initiative go through it. But that doesn't necessarily mean China hopes to fully absorb them into the axis. It doesn't mean that they're there yet. Also, from what I read, most of the Belt and Road projects are failing miserably anyway. Doing terrible, and they alienate the local population. So less concerned about that. So all right, so we've got Russia, China, Belarus, Cuba, Nicaragua, Brazil, Africa. We'll say South Africa, Sudan, Algeria.
It's a lot.
The other African countries that are aligned with Russia would be Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Yeah, those fell to pro-Russian forces. Serbia is kind of in the middle, but a little bit more on Russia's side.
The Serbs kind of hate everybody.
That's the problem when you're dancing the middle there. You kind of
hate everybody.
Alienate everybody. Slovenia right now has a pro-Russian government, so I'd put them in that category. The country of Georgia, led by the Georgian Dream. North Korea, Malaysia, Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. Vietnam, I go back and forth on. Cambodia, Pakistan. That was the big one. And Afghanistan. Those are the big ones I forgot about. And of course, Iran, Iraq would go in there. Syria is getting in the middle, but I would put them in the Axis category for sure. Yemen, at least the part that's controlled by the Houthis. And I think that's all of them. Kuwait is fighting with Iran, but I would put Kuwait. Oh, and Qatar and Turkey. There you go. So I think those are all of them as I go around of the countries that I would put in the Axis category. That's almost all of them.
If one of these countries, like a Middle Eastern one, was to join the Abraham Accords,
thank you,
would they be
Mackenzie.
taken off of that list?
What's that? Say about the Abraham?
If a Middle Eastern country that is on that list were to join in the Abraham Accords, would you then take them off of that list since they have aligned really with the West?
Oh yeah, that would be a line in the sand. Before I was saying thank you, Mackenzie, for the donation for saying that. So the Abraham Accords. What's interesting, I did an analysis for the Blaze last August. There's an article about it. Most people don't know this, but there's like 24 Muslim countries right on the edge of joining the Abraham Accords.
Yep.
So, and if the Trump administration handles it the way I describe in the article, I'm sure they see the opportunity. But I said there's a specific way you can do this and maximize your momentum and make it as big as possible. And I doubt there's no indication that they're following my plan. I haven't talked to anybody about it. But I'm sure they see the opportunity of a lot of countries joining the Abraham Accords. That's an article of the Blaze called collapsing the Islamic Berlin Wall or something. But when this happens, and the trigger would be definitely if Saudi Arabia joins the Abraham Accords, which I have it on very good authority that they basically agreed to during the first term of Trump. But it's a matter of working out some details and having the correct timing and just negotiating. Parties are just, if I sign this, can you give me this? And that's just been going on back and forth. That's the stage it's at. But once that happens, you'll see a parade of countries joining the Abraham Accords. And my argument in my article was, why does it have to just be countries? Like, what about autonomous? Like, the Kurdistan is not a country.
Yeah.
It's an autonomous region of northern Iraq. They would sign up in a day and space this out so that geographically, so that you have a steady stream. Just like I'm thinking of like advertising and marketing, political campaign style. No, not just grab them all. Let's do this in a way so that one fuels the next. And if they were to do that, you could very rapidly, imagine that happening. It's a real possibility. You could very rapidly see I think I got even to 26. I think I said it was 24 or 26 Muslim countries signing the Abraham Accords. That would be astonishing.
So sticking with that though, do you think what we're doing in Iran right now with the war, with weakening Iran more and more, would that cause some more of these Middle Eastern countries to more confidently join the Accords because they're not worried about the repercussions of doing it from Iran? Because I feel like a lot of these countries were pretty damn scared if they didn't have a good buffer, being away from Iran, or didn't have a good military like, a Pakistan or something like that, where they kind of don't care because, they're a nuclear power as well. But do you think as we're weakening Iran, that Trump's also turning around and going to these countries like, you don't have to worry about them now. Join the Accord because they're weak as hell. You're probably strong. You know what I mean? Like, what we're doing there, is that helping the cause?
Definitely. Because Hamas said that one of the reasons for the October 7th attacks was to create a political environment where Saudi Arabia could not join the Abraham Accords. It's easy to forget exactly how much momentum on the side of the Abraham Accords existed, around that time, especially with the Saudis. And so Hamas said, all right, well, and PFLP and Iran, all those guys said, all right, well, we definitely have to put an end to that. And so they did the October 7th attacks for many different reasons, that being one of them. And it worked. Saudi Arabia did say, and there was actually a quote from MBS, the Crown Prince. It was really funny and nobody picked it up. I think it was in Newsweek, and I only saw it because they printed the entire transcript of the interview at the bottom, and I wanted to read every word. And at one point he actually says, he goes, well, if the Palestinians deserve a homeland, the Jews deserve their homeland too, right? And he says it without realizing what he just did. That's recognizing Israel's right to exist.
Yep.
It's just not formally doing it.
And it's weird because the Saudi Arabian sons are brutal, but they also want to be accepted by the West. They're in a real rock and a hard place with what it is they're doing in terms of definitely embracing throwing money around and trying to get Western companies and people to come and, be sponsors of their sporting events and things like
Yeah,
that with the live and soccer, but they're also still brutal. So it's like, I feel like the princes want to westernize more, but then religiously they're like, no, we kind of can't. Like, I think there's an internal struggle in
there is.
The Saudi group there, especially with the way they're allowing women to take their headscarves off and they can
Right.
drive. And Saudi is becoming very Iranian pre 1979 in a lot of ways if they could just get the brutality out.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I've mentioned on the podcast, but for a while I was going to Saudi Arabia once a year. I lead tours in Saudi Arabia. So I've been there a lot. I think like 7 or 8 times. Yeah, those changes are definitely happening. You do hear reports of some conflict where people say, "Oh, we're going too liberal." The conservative Wahhabist types don't like it. There's not as much division as you would expect, and that's because the Saudis do control the clerics. And so when the time comes for the Abraham Accords, it's not hard for the Saudis to turn the keys and say, "Guess what?" To all the mosques that they fund there and around the world, here's the Islamic case for peace. And when they do that, you just switch it all. You just switch, the interpretation of Islam across the world. Yeah. And so domestically, they're already kind of doing it. They're emphasizing times in the past with Muslims and Jews living close together. And Jews used to be in Saudi Arabia. So they're actually, you can't be against them entirely because they were they're part of our history. Like there's smaller messaging being seeded there. But does the U.S., as for your question, yes, the U.S. reducing the threat from Iran, because why did Saudi Arabia delay in the wake of the October 7th attacks? It was because of the threat. The political environment created a threat where it was too much to pursue the Abraham Accords and move forward. So the same applies to Iran. And Trump, I think, even said this, where one of their big concerns was if we team up with Abraham Accords, Iran and Iran's proxies, that's a very, very big threat. Do we want to take that on if we don't have to? Because these countries know that they can make trade agreements independent of the Abraham Accords with Western countries and ourselves, and we're going to take it. So is the incentive really high enough? So you want to reduce the Iranian threat, but here's the thing, and it's a little manipulative, but it's part of the discussion over there. If the Iranian threat is gone, completely gone, there's less incentive for them to join the Abraham Accords. Part of this is the governments and population seeing Iran as a bigger threat, also kind of waking up and seeing, the country that's great Satan and little Satan, they're helping me. It's the Iranians that are actually the great Satan. There's a bit of an awakening happening, especially since Iran is very recklessly and stupidly throwing missiles everywhere across the Arab world, including at Qatar, which was quite friendly to them, to Oman. And apparently there was a drone attack in or near the Suez Canal. So they just decided to pick a fight with Egypt. Very unwise, I guess, so that they could say, we'll threaten that shipping lane too, it makes sense for them to threaten that. But you can also threaten that without doing an actual drone strike. But it seems like they're losing their minds. Like they're just
100%.
You thought they were radical before and stupid before. Like now they're just like an alcoholic that drank too much and is angry in the bar and is just throwing punches everywhere. So there is an argument to be made for not eliminating the Iranian threat, certainly minimizing it so that these countries don't feel threatened to join. But you kind of still want them to be afraid of Iran and need U.S. and want an alliance with Israel and the U.S. for their own benefit against Iran or other adversaries. So they're actually, from that perspective, and I have an article coming out about this, there's an argument to be made for not fully winning the war against Iran and dragging it out for a while.
So I'm going to possibly give this analysis on my show, but I want to ask you to kind of bounce it off, because I know Trump has been getting a lot of criticism with consistently negotiating, right? That's been a big criticism. We bomb a ton. They say they want to negotiate. We start negotiating again. What I've seen and what I've known from Trump is his criticisms of the Middle Eastern wars in the past were, number one, we got nothing out of them. And I think Trump's really trying to get something out of this, whether it's building something during this war to get away from the Strait of Hormuz so they don't have control, or gaining some control, but also he criticized the power vacuum that was left after the battle. So I think with all this negotiation, I think his big goal is to try and avoid, similar to what you're saying, not completely crippling Iran, letting Iran still continue to be a regional power, but forcing them to come into the world economically, forcing them to play ball. So that's kind of what I've seen, is that he doesn't want. Could he go and take everyone out, put boots on the ground, install somebody, but then there's a power vacuum, right? It could easily be done. It would take a month, but we could do it, especially in their current situation. We'd have lives lost. Nobody wants that. But from what I'm just seeing and knowing what I've heard from Trump consistently from every single war we've had in the Middle East, is that power vacuum is something he's fearing. Are you seeing that too, with the way he's just consistently trying to negotiate and things like that?
Yeah, that's part of it. And although some of the agreements and some of the rhetoric going back and forth, I would not have used if I was him. But that's also, Trump's not in this topic with the mindset of me or with the knowledge base of this particular, of like the ideological warfare and all that. But when I look at what our options are, this is the only option, actually. So what looks like it makes no sense. I understand that almost everybody on earth says this doesn't make sense. On the one hand, you see Trump saying we're near a deal, and he says, and then it's, they're the worst, and then we're bombing, and then ceasefire is memorandum of understanding, blah, 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 all this. Yeah, you're not supposed to negotiate with terrorists, but then you kind of are. And it seems as if it's being very erratic and being improvised. But if you look at my article that I wrote for glennbeck.com in January, about a month before Operation Epic Fury even began, I said the likeliest strategy here is going to involve a campaign that over time decreases, but is kind of indefinite, just like CIA strikes against Al Qaeda in Pakistan. You think, it goes on indefinitely. How could we ever go? Well, American people go along with it. Well, we have a lot. Yeah, and I said the likeliest strategy, based on my assessment of all the factors, would be a more drawn out campaign that fades over time as the threat is reduced, and has series of escalations, de-escalations, ceasefires, followed by being broken and then escalations. And you would see it over and over again. I'm not aware of any other analysis that called that out and said that's probably how it's going to go, and that it would actually be a good thing. Here's why it's a good thing. I believe the strategy that the Trump administration is trying to implement is modeled on Israel's war between the wars, or campaign between the wars. Israel identified a midpoint between war, as we call it, and peace or appeasement. You see it even now, where Trump's saying there's a military mission, but not a war. There's different reasons he says that, but
and
there
Trump
actually
also made the joke that a ceasefire is when they're throwing less missiles in that area. Like, he kind of said exactly that. Like, it's a ceasefire because they're not shooting as many rockets off. So like it was tongue in cheek, but it's similar to what you're saying. He probably got that from talking to Bibi and Israeli officials.
Yeah. I mean, Israel would much prefer us to just do a massive campaign and just like end the Iranian regime as soon as possible. But I think that, like I said in my article in January, I said, it's going to be modeled on the war between wars, where the first time Israel struck Syria, Lebanon, Sudan, Yemen, it was such a big deal because it was new. But then when the panic wasn't met with a horrible consequence, then the next time it happened, people didn't panic as much. It wasn't as much of a headline. Mm-hmm. And then Israel did it, with less time in between. One strike, wait a few days, another strike, and over time it became the new normal. And it became about threat mitigation. And in the case of Assad, that Israel not only was mitigating threats as they developed, but also slowly chipping away at the terrorist apparatus and chipping away at the regime. And then ultimately what happened, for various reasons, but including the Israeli campaign in Syria, what happened? The regime just, one day just fell. Now, I'm not saying that would happen with Iran or anywhere else. You can't guarantee how a regime's going to fall. But we have a model that, for what we're trying to achieve, makes sense. and I predicted that we would follow that model in January. You would see all this, what appears to be contradiction, but it actually would be the thing that makes the most sense. And that's exactly what you're seeing. And so this is, people say it's inconsistent, I guess, but it's an inconsistency within a consistent strategy. The strategy is consistent, and it has inconsistencies built into it. Now, in the article I'm coming out with, I say there are 10 keys to understanding the Iran strategy. I won't give them all away right now because I want people to actually read it. Maybe I'll do a podcast about it. But think of it this way, because I'm seeing people saying, like, why wouldn't we just finish off the Iranian regime? The longer we wait right now, we are on an upward trajectory. The Iranian regime is on a downward trajectory. If we drag this out and we escalate next year or after that, we're better prepared. Iran is less prepared. The economic risks are dramatically less because countries are working at warp speed to try to build alternative pipelines, ports, everything to build alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz. There's efforts being made to clear out the Iranian proxies, at least to some degree, in Yemen because of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait over there. They're going to be building up their defenses against drones because you want to secure. Now we know you need to secure the Suez Canal. And so we'll be in a much better spot with a lot less risk and pain later on. So doesn't it make sense? Just keep chipping away at the regime, going back and forth, weakening it over time. And then when time comes where you really need to ramp things up, it'll be easier to do.
So before we get to the next question, I'll just say, I know for a lot of conservatives, the worry isn't militarily, it's politically. They don't want to lose a political battle in November because of the war. But we'll see how that goes. So I'm going to get to a few questions from earlier too. I started a whole bunch here. Sav Smiles asking, have you heard about the city of London?
Yes. Before I get that, someone had a good point there. It said Trump does not want forever wars and he's not a neocon. So is this, the implication being, is my assessment flawed because it doesn't take that into account? The factor, you have to understand is that he doesn't operate with that binary. Like, he can be very black and white, right? But when it comes to war, just like Obama and Bush, they recognize there's a midpoint that the American public has not accepted a description for. There's no term. Like, it's always war and peace to the American public and therefore the politicians and the media. But there is a midpoint. Were we at war with Pakistan after 9/11? No. Did we bomb the hell out of them? Yeah, we did. Were there consistent strikes? Yes. Did we go to war in Somalia? Yemen? Were we at war? No. But we were bombing targets there as we had to. The same thing, I believe, is the goal in Iran. The problem is that Iran can retaliate. So you have to have a massive military mobilization each time you want to do something to knock them down a peg, or you leave it there, but you can't have the military in high alert in a massive mobilization indefinitely. Like that, no, you can't do that. So what the only alternative is to beat up the Iranian regime's capabilities to the point where you can strike at will, reduce the threat, chip away at the regime so it falls in a prepared, more minimally risk way, but you don't have to mobilize the military. You can send in drones. You don't have to prepare for this huge conflict with the Strait of Hormuz. And once it gets to where it's not a big deal anymore, that's the goal. Make it not a big deal to strike the Iranian regime as they start acting up and as we want to stop a gathering threat. And so is that a forever war? I would say no, because the error is just that there isn't a commonly accepted word for this midpoint. But in Trump's mind, indefinitely bombing a country or striking targets with aircraft and drones is not a war. I would agree with them. It's not really a war. It's like threat mitigation. It's like maintenance. It's a different thing. And then eventually, the idea would be that the regime would fall, and then you wouldn't even have that.
It's kind of like taking your kid and your kid acts up and you smack him in the back of the head. This is kind of just repeatedly
Yeah.
smacks in the back of the head. Cut it out type of thing.
Yeah. We told you,
You're
oh,
not-
you're building a terrorist camp. Boom.
You're not
No.
beating them up, but you're letting them know to cut it out.
And you're ending what you're worried about. Oh, I'm worried about their uranium enrichment. Okay, let's remove it. And it doesn't have to be this big thing where it's like you spend a year, a massive military mobilization with all these risks. Well, what about Strait of Hormuz? Like, no, Trump wants to simplify Iran. He wants to make this easy. That might be the best way actually to articulate it. Out of all the ways I described it, he wants to make Iran simple. So he doesn't want regime change necessarily. He'd welcome it, but he doesn't want to pursue it because that's very complicated. Right now, it's very complicated. You have to have a big mobilization. You got to do all to take on Iran for something. You have all these factors. He wants to make it easy. There's a problem. Send in the drone. We're done.
I like it.
Oh, and as for the City of London, sorry. So I haven't looked into that enough. I mean, I just have heard about it in honestly conspiracy theory circles, and like the Lyndon LaRouche types, which are circles that are very conspiratorial and fit the definition of what Russia uses to put out disinformation, and making it sound like the British are trying to revive the British Empire is a key narrative that Russia puts out. They love saying, similar to how they do it with the Jews, where they're like, oh, the hidden hand is the British. The hidden hand's the Jews. It's the same model. So I would just say I'm not fully answering your question because I can't address the City of London or in what context you're interested about. But the context in which I've heard it raised come from conspiratorial circles that you have to be wary of and be on guard for Russian-originated disinformation, because the anti-British narrative, I mean, that's a straight-up Soviet and then Russian thing.
Definitely. All right, so next question. This one came from TX Mother Bird a while ago. Does Soros still have a residence in the U.S.?
Ooh, good question. Good question. I know George Soros didn't, so I know they have offices and organizations in the U.S., including one in New York. Well, he's married to Huma Abedin, so I'm sure, I guess he could be in Europe. I would say Alexander Soros and Huma Abedin are probably in the U.S. Then, but you're right. Like George Soros, I think he moved around and mostly was out of Europe. But what matters most is the registering of organizations. Do they have entities registered in the U.S.? Yes, they do. Where you actually physically reside is kind of a secondary thing, I would say.
Gotcha. So next question coming from Shmuel Sperling. Is Soros actually a Jew? He testified to stealing from Jews during the Holocaust and said he didn't feel guilty at all. Something is very wrong with that guy.
I've seen no indication he's lying about being Jewish. It was a long time ago that I looked into that quote because people kept mentioning it about what he said about the Holocaust. If I'm remembering right, I can double check. When I looked at the full context, yeah, it was not as it was portrayed.
So I could speak to that real quick.
Oh, okay.
It was when he was young. He was a child during that, and he was trying to survive, is how he put it. And essentially, he was willing to trade the lives of fellow Jews to keep him and his family alive. So he was willing to work with SS soldiers to point out where Jews were hiding because he knew that network, and that he felt no remorse for doing it because it was to save his life. Now, it fits the mold with someone who is cowardice and a collectivist, because there's a lot of cowardice that goes along with being a collectivist. You're bold when you're trying to use somebody else, but when you're trying to preserve your own skin, you'll do whatever it takes. So it fits in terms with his, philosophy about the world and everything as well. But that is always the context I understood. He was a young child. It wasn't, maybe not young child, maybe like 12, 13, but he was trying to save his own skin. So he was willing to sell out his Jewish brethren and work with the SS. And it wasn't like he did it one time though, Ryan. He worked with the SS to systematically clear out Jews. So it's it wasn't like it was a one time, I'll tell you where a few are. No,
he said he was 15, right?
Yeah, it was something, he knew what he was doing was wrong, but he was just trying to save his skin. That's the context. And I think you could see he didn't get much better. He kind of stayed evil. So it's not like he got that much better. So that's that. So Juju B had a question from before saying, did you see the migrants invading Spain today?
Yes, I saw that. What a mess that's going on in Europe. So what's interesting is that Russia actually does try to stimulate migrant crises, like in Eastern Europe. Anyway, I'm not saying they're behind that, but it's just interesting that they view that as a weapon of war, as causing migrant crises. That's part of the strategy. Now, how does this fit into the Russian ideology that they're promoting? Because the Tsar's Christianity is pro-Muslim, but then there'll be anti-immigration. There is a lot of racism out of Russia, and they'll seize upon those that say deport everybody from Spain or America. Like, they align with that. So how they reconcile? Well, I saw a propaganda post that from a Russian source that did. They said, well, our Muslim population has been here for a long time, X number of years, so they're part of Russia. So they're a special kind of Muslim. The illegal immigrants, the foreigners who just kind of drop in here, they view them differently, and Russia has no problem stimulating forces that are actually anti-Muslim, that like go that far. And so that's their reconciliation between being pro-Islam, pro-jihadist, and anti-Muslim in other contexts. And that's also a justification for the racism that's common in Russia against the migrant workers that come in. Oh, you're a migrant. That's how they, for people that think, even if you're a racist, you still kind of got to work out those contradictions to do what you already want to do, even if it's evil. So they say, all right, well, there's the homegrown Russian population, which they would include the Chechens in that, ironically enough. But then the migrants that come in and migrants that are invading Europe and stuff, well, that's different because that's not they're not part of the Russian world, in other words. So
interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So this was a question from before when we were talking about like the map and the alignments of states. Is this the same as the New World Order in terms of your Axis individuals?
So no, because, well, first of all, everybody has a different definition of the New World Order. That became.
We can ask George H.W. Bush because he was the one that really brought it up for the first time out in the public space.
Yeah. Yep. And that was spread in the 90s. I remember in the 90s when I started this stuff as a kid, there was a really interesting overlap. Here's what it comes from. Most people don't realize this. There was a crossover between the radical Second Amendment militias who believe like the world is ending. They're like, all of our Clinton, and before that, I think they even started saying it about Bush. They're like, they're going to come take away all your guns and all your rights. It's imminent. Prepare to fight. Prepare for the next American Revolution. Very unhealthy mindset. And then the internet develops. Now you need content to recruit, so that ideology is now spread throughout, and it crossed over with a lot of interest in biblical end times prophecy. And one of the prophecies is that the most common interpretation, I know there's a few, is that Antichrist will have a one world government, the whole globe. I know there's another interpretation that says it could be like a caliphate, like it can be regional. So there's different takes. But in America, the predominant way it was taught was that the Antichrist will establish a new world order, and it'll happen very, very fast. And so then that fused with conspiracy theories that said, all right, well, how does he do that? Oh, our government must be in on it. The elites must be in on it. For this to happen, there has to be a hidden hand. So you had this hyper focus to a degree I never fully grasped on the end times and the Antichrist forming a one world government. And that overlapped with this radical militias saying a dictatorship was coming, because that fits the apocalyptic narrative, and it also fits the Antichrist one world government. And then that fits the conspiracy theory layer of the internet. And all three came together. And I remember seeing it in 1998 was when I first became really aware of it. And then it really escalated in 1999 when NATO bombed Yugoslavia. But Alex is right. The key, where did the New World, why did that become the key phrases? Because President Bush said there's a new world order after the Soviet Union. And then those that were interested in end times prophecy and these types of conspiracies said that's the one world government. It sounds like the one world government of the Antichrist. The rapture is about to happen. get your guns, all that. And I'm sure, like, if he could have not used those words, I'm sure he would have. But the term New World Order wasn't always popularized like it is now. And so now what does it mean? It means a bunch of things to a bunch of different people. I never use the term because, like, you got to be able to, everyone has to agree. If I'm going to go to a zoo and I want to talk about the tiger, we'll all have to know what a tiger is. New World Order, how am I going to talk about it when every single person has a different interpretation of what that is and whether it exists or not?
Yep. So I will just finish it off with saying it's one of the most important pro wrestling stables of all time, the NWO.
That is right.
Wrestling. WCW. Right. There you go.
And then they took it over the dark brother, the evil brother to WWF, right?
Yeah, WCW. They ended up losing the Monday Night Wars. And listen, I'm a wrestling nerd, so I can get deep into that part too. Okay. Mackenzie also asked, so what's all this stuff with Tucker and Qatar?
So I think that's just him adopting the multipolar world ideology. I don't know if there's something more nefarious there. There could be, because Qatar did hire lobbyists to do this type of stuff. And one of the things that the lobbyists report is that they arranged an interview between, I think it was the foreign minister of Qatar and Tucker. Some people said that, this proves that Tucker was paid for that. It doesn't mean that. If Tucker had a position in the lobbying firm, you can make that argument, but the lobbying firm got the money. They just had the contact with Tucker and arranged the interview. Tucker, aside from downplaying the horrors of Sharia law and how much we concerned about jihad, the thing he said that was so interesting to me was that because it didn't quite fit. I always say focus on anomalies. We were used to how he typically praised Qatar, and they threw in there. He's like, "I'm going to buy a home here." Like that's if you want to demonstrate how much you like a place, you have many options. He says, "I'm going to buy a home here." So there's a bunch of different reasons theoretically he could want to do that, but that indicates to me he's looking to develop a stronger direct relationship with Qatar. And then the other day on RT, he said that Russia, of all the countries he's ever visited, Russia is his favorite one. It's getting similar to Candace, guys.
Yep, we learned that. All right, so another question came in from TX Motherbird 63. Ryan, is it true Iran hung some more protesters?
Yes. Yep.
So that is sad. We can confirm that.
I do wish we should throw that into the negotiations, because when Trump did at one point, the Iranians backed off of it. They might have killed them later. I forget exactly. But I know at least for a moment, they canceled executions. And that's happened in the past, even before Trump, where the U.S. exerted pressure and Iran has backed off of it. That's something we should be doing that works. Okay, so we've seen they're vulnerable that way. They're afraid of it. We can save the lives of good people. I get we're all talking about nuclear stuff, like all things you're talking, throw that in there. Throw that in there.
Yeah.
Let's try to save their lives, and it also puts the regime in a bad spot. They don't like it. So it's sad that they and many, many others, I mean, you're seeing teenagers getting executed, and I see them on Instagram, the pictures of them. It's just awful.
But shout out to their bravery, though. Their bravery is incredible for knowing that is more than likely their fate. They go out there knowing that if they do get caught, they're going to be executed. It's going to be public, and it's going to be brutal. It's not going to be swift. It's going to be something to try and teach other protesters a lesson. So let's not make them martyrs for a cause that fails. Let's try and help them as much as possible.
Yeah.
Wild and Wired Regina over here coming in asking, where is Soros from? Do you know where?
I forget
where someone said Austria, but I don't think he's Austrian. I don't think he's following in the.
Was it Hungary? No.
I forget.
Well, maybe. Exactly. Well, I forget where he was born. I know he's operating out of London for a while because that's where he got rich when he shorted the market.
Oh, he just ruined the whole entire British pound.
Yeah, I don't know enough about how to do those type of schemes to explain it. Alex, if you know how to explain what he did, then by all means. But I just know they shorted the market, and a lot of people were like, "Isn't that criminal?" And he made a ton of money at the expense of other people, and that's where the wealth
is from. Hungary, Budapest, Hungary.
Oh, he is from Hungary. Okay.
Yep, you were correct. The Google machine is what that says there. Okay, so Waffles Bacon asks you, could you please do a Yasser Arafat deep dive one day?
Oh, I could. Right now, I think people like me following the evidence trails. so that you guys are kind of doing research along with me. I don't see other podcasts doing it. I guess you could say Candace kind of tries to do it.
But she'll tell you about it next week.
What's that?
She'll tell you about the real facts next week.
Yeah. So she does follow a model of, news update, almost like news type updates to her research, but it's all crap. I'm more granular where she'll present like facts to you, whereas I'll show evidence trails. So it's a different approach, one that's actually accurate, more meaningful. It's the right way to do it. Even if you want to pursue what she's doing and find the so-called real killer, Charlie Kirk, she's not even presenting it in a way that like she should. She go along evidence trails. Don't just like throw things out, but that's what she does. But what that shows is that there's a market for that. It shows there's a market for the idea of live investigations where the audience can participate, the audience can help with research, and they go on the journey with you. And so that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast is to take that market opportunity that Candace correctly identified, except do it in a way that isn't completely batshit crazy.
And I just want to say we'll answer a few more questions here, but typically Ryan will answer super chats at the end. If we're approaching the 2 hour mark. I know we typically don't like to try and go that much further over 2 hours. So if we have time, we will answer questions. I will flag them from the chat, but I just always want to let everyone know I don't want anyone to ever get mad. If there's super chats here, they will take priority. It doesn't matter if it's a 99-cent super chat, that will take priority. So if you ask a question in the chat and we don't get to it during the show, please don't get peeved. If there's super chats there, or if we're getting close to that 2 hour mark, we'll take time to answer the super chats and then we'll get out of here. But I just want to let everyone know that going forward, if we get closer, it'll be the super chats that have priority, but we're happy to answer them now. I just don't want everyone to think that this is going to be the norm, that we are just going to fly through everyone's questions to finish off a show. As much as we would love to, we have to prioritize certain things. And I know Ryan's too nice of a guy to say that, so I'm going to be the one to come out and let everyone know. So next question, Nikki for Freedom. Thoughts on midterms and how we get people to turn out when conservatives typically don't have a good turnout with midterms. US.
I'm really not the right guy to answer that because I am genuinely a political independent. So like to get recommendations from me on conservative turnout or liberal turnout, kind of irrelevant.
As the conservative here, I'm mad at most Republicans because we are the fakest, pull by your bootstrap type of people of all time. We're too busy to be bothered. And when we lose elections, we wonder why someone else didn't go and join up and work local. So I will say, you want turnouts today, go find out who your candidate is for local elections, state elections, federal elections, and go join the campaign somehow. That's how we get turnout, getting out. It's people locally. And this is if you're a Democrat or a Republican, but the Democrats understand this. Republicans have not. So if you're a conservative and you want to have a good turnout for the Republican Party, getting involved is the only way, because door knocking, old-fashioned door knocking, is still the best way to win an election. So that's how we get a good turnout, is you convince one person to join you in helping, and they convince one person, and now all of a sudden a candidate now has a good grassroots foundation. So that is me, someone who is politically active and on the right. That's how we get a good turnout, is you be the person that starts getting active. Don't wait for somebody else to go do it. So that would be my advice there. Next question. Marimar277. Ryan, in your research, what country and religion is a serious threat to our country and why?
Let's see. If I pick one. Well, one with the religion, I'm gonna have to go. I would go with Russia. I was debating one of the countries that promote radical Islam, but I mean that is a low ceiling in the U.S. It's still a very small population that's Muslim. So Russia's promoting Tsarist Christianity. I would argue, just like the Saudis and Qatar promoted Wahhabism and their version of radical Islam in the Muslim community in the U.S. and around the world, Russia's now following that same model. So I would go with Russia. And Russia is also, of the entire axis of sedition, as I call it, the most aggressive. increasingly, I think, unhinged, and has some of the worst plans that are most likely to succeed. You can make an argument that China is a bigger threat, but they are less aggressive, and Russia is really steering the ship when it comes to this particular conflict. And China also does it. I know they promote communism, and they've done it on college campuses and stuff, but you're not seeing I'm not seeing a big intellectual movement of being birthed of pro-Chinese Communist Party communism in the U.S. You'll find them, they're promoting it, but I just don't see it happening like I see Tsarist Christianity, because I've heard for so many years from Christians and again, this goes to the danger of some of the end times things. And I'm not saying you should avoid it. Like, if you find that interesting, pursue it. If it strengthens your faith, pursue it. Absolutely. Just know that there is a risk, because in my experience, people that got really into it tend to get very gloomy. Part of them also because they're looking forward to the rapture, if they believe in that. They almost want things to go to hell in a handbasket. And so they have an interest in seeing the entire world as, oh, it's Sodom and Gomorrah. That means the rapture is coming soon. So there's like an incentive. And so Russia is able to latch upon that, and say, all right, look at all this pessimism. American Christians are saying that America's like Sodom and Gomorrah. Before you condemn the United States, I know there's things that you can condemn, and I'm speaking as a Christian. Look at America or any other country in other time periods, because if you selectively point out the things you don't like, you can point to verses in the Bible and say, all right, well, people will be damned for doing that. And it's easy to make the depiction that America is Sodom and Gomorrah and full of evil and about to be destroyed by God. But it isn't if you compare it to other countries and you compare it to other time periods, and you actually look for positive trends. So there is a negative mental health thing that I see happen with some people that get too wrapped up in the end times thing. But I'm only mentioning that because I see how Russia and Tsarist Christianity can latch onto it, because the core message is America is failing and America is evil, but you're still Christian. Here's the version of Christianity that syncs up with that.
And this is why Ryan is the host, tying that question right back into the show, damn it. So last question we're going to take here, TX Motherbird 63. Ryan, did you know Andrew Wilson trolled Candace with a medical professional comments, and she shared it only to find out Andrew said it was him? Andrew Wilson's awesome.
Yeah. He's very entertaining, even though I have my own, issues about how he handles certain people in certain situations. And ideologically, there's some issues that we can talk about there with the orthobros, as they're called. Actually, David Wood did a debate with Andrew Wilson where my article for Glenn Beck called "The Russian Influence Operations Targeting Candace Owens and You." I laid out this Russian Tsarist offensive, and David Wood was actually spent some time. It looked like using my article as a source, because he went in the same order as the sources I cite in there. So there is a debate happening with Orthodox Christians in America. Andrew Wilson is an Orthodox. My understanding is that he takes more of the position of nothing to see here, be worried about with the Russian influence. So that's just where I say. But yeah, he's entertaining. He can be funny as hell. And I love how he pranked Candace. And the best thing about it is, assuming that really is him, I'm sure it is. But if Candace might say, oh, he's claiming credit for something he didn't do. But I'm sure it is. He just posted comments on YouTube. It wasn't to the tip line. And in this world, I just know from being in there, you can pretty easily be one step removed from almost anybody, especially if you have a platform like Andrew does. All right, so why not have a friend drop it in her mailbox, or a friend send her a text, forward her a text? There's a bunch of different ways you reach her. He did the easiest, least likely to succeed thing, which was post fake medical analysis on her YouTube channel, and she screenshot it and happily posted it. It's just beautiful. It just doesn't get any better.
But that's it for the questions. Thank you. Chat's been bumping tonight, so thank you to all that chatted and all that asked questions. everyone that sent super chats and everything. Ryan, take it away.
All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning into the Counteroffensive. Again, $1 challenge, RyanMorrow.com if you want to make a tax-deductible donation to the Morrow Institute so I can continue to do this because as I switch jobs and figure out income, I want this to be something that I can preserve and even expand. As of right now, it looks like it would be very difficult to expand. And Alex doesn't like to hear this, but this type of podcast, I can't promise it's going to keep going, regularly. But with your support, it can. And there's different ways we can even expand it. So like and subscribe, comment, all of that helps the algorithm. And even if you've already done it, share it, do, any type of engagement with my posts on X or anywhere, but especially this video is helpful. That's a bit of a donation in a way. The $1 challenge, I challenge everyone to donate at least $1 tax deductible to the Morrow Institute at RyanMorrow.com. And I think that's it for all the plugs. I will talk to you guys next week, Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern. I haven't decided what the topic will be, but I will be spending time going through, for those of you that are really interested in the Candace and George Farmer angle, just wait. I might drop a little bit next week. Just to keep everybody happy. Drop a small sample of the piles of information I have to go through. But when I do, man, oh man, this thing just gets bigger and bigger. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Counteroffensive.
Bye, everyone.